What happens when a man accustomed to bulldozing skylines tries to flatten the spirit of a woman who has nothing left to lose but her dignity? This is not just the story of a waitress and a real estate magnate. It is the story of the moment when Sterling Croft, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with gilded towers and ruthless ambition, made a single condescending demand of a young woman trying to keep a roof over her grandmother's head. "We're in America. Speak Spanish," he sneered, expecting her to wilt, to stammer an apology. He anticipated the quiet submission he bought and sold every day. What he received instead was a response, delivered with breathtaking fluency in 5 distinct languages, that did more than just silence his table. It exposed the rotten foundations of his entire empire and set in motion a chain of events that would bring it all crashing down. The Gilded Quill was not merely a restaurant. It was a hushed cathedral of power in the heart of Washington, D.C. The air hummed with the low baritone of political deal-making and the clink of ice in glasses of scotch that cost more than a weekly grocery bill. For the patrons, it was an extension of their boardrooms. For the staff, it was a nightly performance on a tightrope, where a single misstep could mean a plunge into unemployment. Among the performers was Isabella Rossi, or Izzy, as her grandmother called her. To the powerful men and women she served, she was a pleasant, efficient blur in a starched black apron. At 21, she possessed a quiet grace, her movements economical and precise, a product of a life spent anticipating needs and solving problems before they arose. Her colleagues, like the perpetually flustered but kind-hearted Maria, saw her as preternaturally calm. "How do you do it, Izzy?" Maria whispered one evening while polishing silverware. "When Senator Thompson comes in, my hands shake so much I'm afraid I'll baptize him with his own Chardonnay." "You? You look like you're watering plants." Izzy offered a small, tired smile. "Just pretend they're regular people, Maria. It's easier that way." But she knew they weren't. And she knew that her manager, a man named Philip, whose posture seemed permanently bent in a deferential bow, lived in mortal terror of offending them. No one inspired more terror in Philip than Sterling Croft. The name Croft was etched onto the city's skyline in steel and glass. Croft Developments was a behemoth that had reshaped the waterfront, erected gleaming office towers, and, as whispered in the city's less glamorous corners, displaced thousands in the process. Sterling Croft had inherited a respectable family business, and through sheer, unapologetic aggression, turned it into an empire. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair, a year-round tan, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He dined at the Gilded Quill twice a week, always at table 12, a corner booth that was both secluded and offered a panoptic view of the entire dining room, as if from a throne. He demanded not perfection, but submission. He saw the staff not as human beings, but as components of the service he was purchasing. "Mr. Croft is on his way," Philip announced at the pre-shift briefing, his voice tight. "He is hosting Mr. Moreno from Mexico City, a major deal. Everything, and I mean everything, must be flawless. Rossi, you're on his section. You're steady. Don't mess this up." A wave of sympathetic glances washed over Izzy from her co-workers. Serving Croft was a penance. He would send back a perfectly cooked steak, claiming the grill marks were asymmetrical. He would complain that the silence in the restaurant was too loud. His displeasure was a cold front that could chill the entire room. Izzy simply nodded. "Of course, Philip." Inside, however, a familiar, weary dread settled in her gut. It wasn't just his notoriously foul temper. It was what he represented. The effortless power, the casual cruelty, the assumption that the world and everyone in it was for sale. He was the embodiment of the forces that had derailed her life. 2 years ago, she had been a scholarship student at Georgetown, top of her class in the prestigious linguistics program. Her mind danced with syntax and phonetics, with the beautiful, intricate ways humanity had found to connect. She had dreamed of being a UN interpreter, of building bridges with words. That dream had shattered when her grandmother, her nonna, the only family she had left, suffered a debilitating stroke. The medical bills were a tidal wave, and Izzy's modest scholarship was a sandcastle. She had dropped out, trading her textbooks for a server's notepad, her dreams of Geneva for the gilded cage of the Gilded Quill. Her nonna, a proud Italian immigrant who had scrubbed floors so her granddaughter could reach for the sky, now needed full-time care. Every dollar Izzy earned went to that, to keeping them in their small, rent-controlled apartment in Adams Morgan, a building that was one of the last holdouts of old D.C. in a neighborhood being rapidly devoured by developers just like Croft. So when he walked in, he was more than a difficult customer. He was a symbol of her gilded cage. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a scholar in exile, a granddaughter fighting to keep her world from being demolished. And tonight, her monster had come for dinner. As the clock struck 8, Izzy performed her final checks on table 12. The heavy silverware gleamed. The wine glasses were so clear they seemed to be spun from air. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Tonight, she was not Isabella Rossi, the Georgetown prodigy. She was a waitress. She was invisible. Her survival depended on it. At precisely 8:05 p.m., Sterling Croft swept through the door, 5 minutes late, an assertion of dominance in itself. He moved not like a man entering a room, but like one inspecting a property he already owned. Trailing in his wake was a shorter, distinguished-looking gentleman with kind eyes and a warm, open face. This was Mr. Moreno. Philip scurried to meet them, his smile strained. "Mr. Croft, a pleasure. Your table is ready, of course." Croft grunted, his gaze sweeping the room with dismissive authority. He led his guest to table 12, settled himself, and immediately began scrolling through his phone, a clear signal that the preliminaries were over and the service should commence. Izzy felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Be a ghost, be wallpaper. She picked up 2 heavy, leather-bound menus, plastered on her professional smile, and glided toward the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Quill. May I start you off with something to drink? Perhaps some water for the table?" Her voice was a model of serene professionalism. Croft didn't look up. "Scotch, Macallan 25, and don't drown it." Mr. Moreno, however, smiled warmly at her. "Agua mineral, por favor, con una rodaja de limón." "Mineral water, please, with a slice of lemon." Without a flicker of hesitation, Izzy's training, not as a waitress but as a linguist, took over. She responded in perfectly clear, unaccented Spanish. "Claro que sí, señor. Una excelente lección. Se lo traigo enseguida." "Of course, sir. An excellent choice. I will bring it right away." For the first time that evening, Sterling Croft's head snapped up. His icy blue eyes narrowed on her. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He had not understood the exchange, and Sterling Croft hated being on the outside of any conversation, especially one happening at his own table. He was a man who controlled the narrative. Mr. Moreno was delighted. He continued in Spanish, his tone appreciative. "Qué sorpresa! Habla usted un español magnífico. ¿Es de familia?" "What a surprise! You speak magnificent Spanish. Is it from your family?" "Mi abuelo era de Italia, señor, pero creía que cada nuevo idioma era una nueva alma. Me enseñó a apreciar el hermoso tapiz de las lenguas." Izzy replied smoothly, still in Spanish, as she filled a water glass for him. "My grandfather was from Italy, sir, but he believed that every new language was a new soul. He taught me to appreciate the beautiful tapestry of languages." Crack. Croft slammed his phone face down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Philip, hovering by the service station, visibly flinched. "Enough of that!" Croft's voice was a low snarl, thick with irritation. He wasn't just annoyed, he was offended. He fixed his penetrating gaze on Izzy, his lip curling. "I am trying to do business here. We are in America. My guest is here to do business with an American company." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "You will speak Spanish. You understand me?" "Only Spanish. That's what he speaks. Show him that respect." The demand was absurd, illogical, and deeply insulting. He hadn't understood a word she'd said, assuming she was chattering away in some other tongue. He was commanding her to use the very language she was using, but on his terms, as a performance for his benefit. He was turning her skill into a party trick he could command. Mr. Moreno looked deeply uncomfortable. Sterling, please, it's no problem. Her Spanish is perfect. I was enjoying... I don't care what you were enjoying, Hector. Croft cut him off, his eyes still locked on Izzy. I'm paying for service, not a UN translation seminar. So, let's try this again. From the top, in Spanish. The world seemed to slow down for Izzy. Every nerve ending screamed at her to apologize, to shrink, to become the invisible ghost she was supposed to be. It was the safe path, the path that paid her rent. But as she looked at Croft's smug, arrogant face, something broke. It was the dam of 2 years of swallowed pride, of sacrificed dreams, of watching her brilliant Nona struggle to form words while this man commanded them like a dog. She thought of her grandfather, who had taught her that languages were bridges to connect people, not walls to isolate them or tools to demean them. She held Sterling Croft's gaze. The polite, vacant waitress smile dissolved, replaced by a look of crystalline composure. First, she turned to Mr. Moreno and spoke in the soft, melodic Spanish he understood. Señor Moreno, le pido mil disculpas por la ignorancia de mi jefe. Su falta de cultura es vergonzosa. Permítame continuar en un idioma que él pueda, quizás, comprender. Mr. Moreno, I offer 1,000 apologies for my employer's ignorance. His lack of culture is embarrassing. Allow me to continue in a language he might, perhaps, understand. Then she straightened her posture slightly and addressed Croft directly. But the words that emerged were not in Spanish. They were in fluid, diplomatic French, her tone as cool and smooth as polished marble. Monsieur, la véritable courtoisie ne réside pas dans le fait d'exiger, mais dans l'art de comprendre. Une leçon que votre fortune ne semble pas vous avoir apprise. Sir, true courtesy does not lie in demanding, but in the art of understanding. A lesson your fortune does not seem to have taught you. Croft's jaw went slack. He stared, utterly bewildered, recognizing only the defiance in her tone. Before he could form a response, she shifted again, her voice acquiring the crisp, precise cadence of High German. Ein Mann von ihrer Statur sollte wissen, dass wahre Macht nicht im Befehlen liegt, sondern darin, Respekt zu verdienen. A man of your stature should know that true power is not in commanding, but in earning respect. By now, a profound silence had descended upon the surrounding tables. Philip looked like he was witnessing his own execution. Mr. Moreno's initial embarrassment had transformed into wide-eyed, undisguised admiration. Izzy wasn't done. Her final shift was to the language of her heart, the rapid, passionate Italian her nonna had sung to her in lullabies. Her voice was no longer cool. It was filled with the fire of her ancestors. Lei disonora il tavolo con la sua arroganza. Mio nonno diceva che un uomo si misura da come tratta chi non può fargli niente. E lei, signore, è un uomo molto, molto piccolo. You dishonor this table with your arrogance. My grandfather used to say a man is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. And you, sir, are a very, very small man. Finally, having taken him on a tour of a world he could never hope to inhabit, she returned to him. She looked him directly in the eye, and in perfect, unaccented, devastatingly clear American English, the kind spoken in the Georgetown lecture halls she had been forced to abandon, she delivered the final blow. But of course, Mr. Croft, you demanded I speak Spanish. I have been. Perhaps the problem isn't the language I'm speaking, but your ability to listen. Now, may I get you that Macallan 25? Or do you require a few more moments to process the menu? The insult was not in the foreign words he couldn't understand. It was in the final, simple English sentence that he understood perfectly. She hadn't just talked back. She had held up a mirror, and in the opulent silence of the gilded quill, Sterling Croft was forced to see the reflection of a small, ignorant man, utterly outclassed and publicly humiliated by a waitress. And for the first time in a very long time, he had absolutely no idea what to do. The silence that blanketed Table 12 was a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. Sterling Croft's face, usually a mask of tanned patrician confidence, was a mottled canvas of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had been challenged and defeated in a battle he hadn't even known he was fighting. He, a man who moved markets with a single phone call, had been publicly neutered by an employee whose name he didn't know. With a violent scrape of wood against marble, He shoved his chair back from the table. He tossed his napkin down as if it were a gauntlet. "Hector, we're leaving." Mr. Moreno, looking both horrified by his host's behavior and profoundly impressed by Izzy, started to object. "Sterling, wait a moment. The young lady was extraordinary, a true polyglot." "Now!" Croft commanded, his voice a low, venomous hiss. He stalked away from the table without a backward glance, a king abandoning a battlefield where he had been inexplicably routed. Mr. Moreno gave Izzy a final look, a mixture of apology and deep respect, before scurrying to catch up. The moment the heavy doors swung shut behind them, the restaurant buzzed with frantic whispers. Izzy remained rooted to the spot, the adrenaline that had fueled her defiance beginning to drain away, leaving a chilling premonition in its wake. She had won the moment, but in doing so, she had likely lost everything else. Her job, her anonymity, the fragile stability she had fought so hard to build. Philip rushed toward her, his face the color of spoiled milk. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice a mixture of terror and fury. "Are you out of your mind? That was Sterling Croft. He could have this restaurant shut down on a whim. He could buy this entire block and replace it with a monument to his own ego." "He was a pig, Philip," Maria said, appearing at Izzy's side, her face alight with awe. "He deserved every word. That was the most amazing thing I have ever seen in my life." "Amazing? She's fired. That's what's amazing," Philip sputtered, wringing his hands. "Rossi, my office, now." As Izzy walked the length of the dining room, she felt the stares of every patron. But one pair of eyes was different. They belonged to an older man sitting alone at a small table near the bar. He was perhaps 70, dressed in a slightly rumpled tweed jacket, with a kind but piercingly intelligent gaze behind wire-rimmed glasses. He hadn't been whispering. He had been watching, observing the entire exchange with the focused intensity of a chess master. As Izzy passed, he met her gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod of approval. The gesture was small, but it felt like a silent affirmation, a signal she couldn't yet decipher. In Philip's tiny, cluttered office, the lecture was predictable. He paced and ranted about reputation, about profit margins, about the wrath of Sterling Croft. "I have no choice, Rossi. You're a good worker, but this is career suicide. For both of us. Clear out your locker. Your final check will be mailed." Izzy just nodded. She had expected it. "I understand." In the staff changing room, her hands trembled slightly as she unbuttoned her uniform for the last time. Maria found her there. "Don't you worry about a thing," Maria said, her voice fierce. "You're a hero. Any place in this city would be lucky to have you." "Thanks, Maria," Izzy managed, but the words felt hollow. As she stepped out the back alley door into the humid DC night, the weight of her reality crashed down. Jobless. Rent due in a week. Nona's next medication refill was on Friday, and now Sterling Croft knew her face. What if his anger didn't end with her firing? What if a man that powerful and that vindictive decided to dig deeper? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. Meanwhile, in the silent, leather-scented interior of his chauffeured Bentley, Sterling Croft was seething. The humiliation was a physical burn. It wasn't just that she had defied him. It was the way she had done it, with an intellectual and cultural arsenal he couldn't comprehend, let alone counter. She had spoken in languages of a world he did not possess, and it was infuriating. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for his head of security. He wanted to crush her, find out where she lived, who she was, and make her life a living hell. But a small, calculating part of his brain took over. A public demolition would look petty. It would give the story legs. No, this required a more subtle form of retribution. He made a different call, to the legal department of Croft Developments. "It's Croft," he said, his voice clipped. "I want you to run a title search on a property, an old brick apartment building in Adams Morgan. I don't have the exact address, but I want a list of every pre-war, rent-controlled building in that neighborhood. I have a sudden interest in urban renewal." He hung up. He wouldn't just get her fired. He would take her home. He would bulldoze her life, literally. Back on the street, Izzy clutched her worn canvas tote bag and started the long walk to the metro. As she turned onto a quieter side street, a voice emerged from the shadows of a brownstone stoop. That was quite the linguistic fireworks display, Ms. Rossi. Izzy froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around to see the older gentleman from the restaurant, the one with the observant eyes. He stepped into the dim glow of a streetlight, a wry smile on his face. "Who are you?" Izzy asked, her voice sharp with suspicion as she took a half-step back. "The name is Ben Carter," he said, his voice a gravelly remnant of decades of cigarettes and late-night deadlines. "And I used to be a reporter for the Chronicle. The kind that got people like Sterling Croft indicted." He gestured vaguely back toward the restaurant. "I've been trying to nail that son of a bitch to the wall for the better part of a decade. He's slippery, built an empire on corruption, but he covers his tracks with an army of lawyers." Izzy stared at him, bewildered. "What does that have to do with me?" "For 10 years, I've seen people cower before that man," Ben said, his eyes boring into hers. "Senators, council members, union bosses. Tonight, for the first time, I saw someone make him look like a fool. You didn't just talk back to him. You exposed him. You showed him for the ignorant thug he is. You got under his skin. People who get under Sterling Croft's skin have a tendency to find their lives getting complicated." He seemed to be studying her, weighing her. His initial demeanor, she realized, wasn't just admiration. It was evaluation. He was a journalist, and he had just seen a potential source, a potential lever. "He won't stop at getting you fired," Ben continued, his tone turning grim. "A man like that, humiliated like that, he'll want to erase you. He'll come after your job prospects, your apartment, anything he can touch." A cold dread washed over Izzy. It was exactly what she had been fearing. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For now, I want you to have my number," he said, pulling a worn dog-eared business card from his wallet. "My home number. The paper put me out to pasture years ago, but I never stopped digging. Croft's greatest vulnerability is his first big project, the Blue Heron waterfront development. It was his masterpiece, the deal that made him a titan, and it was rotten to the core. Bribes, falsified environmental reports, the works. I've always known it, but I could never find the proof. The original city files, they vanished." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Croft is going to make your life difficult. When he does, don't just get mad. Get even. You have a weapon you don't even realize you're holding. His undivided, furious attention. Call me when you're ready to learn how to aim it." He pressed the card into her hand. It felt flimsy, but it carried an unexpected weight. Before she could ask another question, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Izzy alone on the quiet street, a tiny piece of cardboard in her palm that felt like it could either be a lifeline or an anchor. The war, she realized with a sickening certainty, had only just begun. The next 2 weeks were a slow-motion nightmare. True to Ben Carter's prediction, Izzy's life began to unravel. Every restaurant job she applied for, even for positions she was wildly overqualified for, resulted in a polite but firm rejection. A friend who worked at one of the city's top catering companies told her confidentially that a whisper campaign had started, a rumor that she was unstable, prone to outbursts at customers. The invisible hand of Sterling Croft was closing doors all over the city. The final crushing blow came not as a whisper, but as an official-looking letter taped to the front door of her apartment building. It was an eviction notice. The building had been sold to a subsidiary of Croft Developments. Their rent-controlled status was being legally challenged, and the new owners intended to demolish the property to make way for a luxury condominium tower to be called the Croft Regency. They had 60 days to vacate. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Izzy. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her Nona, who had lived in this apartment for 40 years. It was about Mrs. Rodriguez on the 3rd floor, a widow on a fixed income, and the Tedeschi family on the 1st, who had just welcomed a new baby. Croft wasn't just bulldozing a building, he was bulldozing a community. Her Nona, sitting in her armchair by the window, saw the look on Izzy's face and the letter in her trembling hand. Her speech was slow, the words a struggle since the stroke, but her mind was as sharp as ever. "Che succede, Isabella?" "What is it?" Izzy couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. "Just a notice from the city, Nonna, about the plumbing. That night, feeling the walls of her life closing in, she finally pulled out the dog-eared business card and dialed Ben Carter's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff. "Carter, it's Isabella Rossi, the waitress." "I know who you are," he said. There was a pause. "He came after your building, didn't he?" "How did you know?" "It's his signature move. Why crush a bug when you can salt the earth where it lives?" "I'm sorry, kid, but I'm also not surprised. This is the opening I was telling you about." Izzy sat on her bed, the eviction notice crumpled in her fist. "An opening? Mr. Carter, I'm about to be homeless. My grandmother is sick. This isn't some newspaper story for me. This is my life." "I know that." Ben's voice softened slightly, a flicker of empathy cutting through the journalistic cynicism. "And that's why you're the only one who can do this. You have the motivation. I've hit a brick wall for years trying to find the original paperwork for the Blue Heron development. I'm convinced the files weren't destroyed, just buried deep in the city's archives. The D.C. Municipal Records Department is a bureaucratic labyrinth, a paper graveyard. No one knows how to navigate it, but someone with a reason to look, a real reason, might see something everyone else has missed. You want me to go looking for files? I'm a waitress, not a private investigator." "You're not a waitress anymore, kid. You're an unemployed linguistics prodigy who is about to lose her home to a corrupt son of a bitch." "That's a hell of a resume for this job," Ben retorted. "And your language skills, that's your secret weapon." Croft's early partners on that project were from all over: a German engineering firm, a Spanish architectural consultant, an Italian marble supplier. The paperwork from that era is a mess. It's possible the files are indexed or annotated in a language other than English, something a regular clerk would skip right over. A plan began to form, audacious and desperate. Ben still had contacts, old friends in low places within the city's bureaucracy. He could pull a string, get her a temporary position in the records department, a low-level clerk, filing and sorting. It would be tedious, soul-crushing work, but it would put her inside the maze. "He wants to erase your home from the map, Miss Rossi," Ben said, his voice low and intense. "The only way to stop him is to erase his empire from the city. The Blue Heron files are the foundation. You find them. You save your home. It's that simple and that difficult." Looking at her nonna sleeping peacefully in the next room, Izzy knew she had no other choice. She couldn't fight Sterling Croft with money or power. She had to fight him with what she had: a brilliant mind, a desperate heart, and a grandfather's belief that every language held a new soul and maybe, just maybe, a hidden clue. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Okay, Ben. Tell me what I need to do." The District of Columbia Municipal Records Department was located in the basement of a nondescript government building, a subterranean world that smelled of aging paper, dust, and forgotten coffee. It was a place where ambition went to die, staffed by career bureaucrats who moved with the glacial pace of people counting down the days to retirement. For Izzy, it was the belly of the beast. Ben's contact had come through. She was hired as a temporary records assistant, tasked with the monumental project of digitizing pre-1990s zoning and permit applications. Her supervisor was a woman named Marge, whose face seemed permanently fixed in a weary frown and who communicated primarily in sighs. The first few weeks were a lesson in monotony. Izzy sat in a small windowless cubicle, scanning brittle documents into an ancient machine. But unlike her colleagues, who saw only tedious work, Izzy saw a puzzle. She applied the same observational skills she had honed as a waitress, noticing the subtle ticks of a customer, the flow of the dining room, to the flow of paper. She learned the department's arcane filing systems, the unofficial shortcuts the senior clerks used, the places where paperwork went to disappear. Every night she would speak with Ben, reporting her slow, frustrating progress. He acted as her handler, her mentor, teaching her what to look for: inconsistencies in permit numbers, unusually fast-tracked approvals, names of shell corporations he had long suspected were linked to Croft. "Look for the outliers, kid," he'd say over the phone. "Bureaucracy is all about patterns. When the pattern breaks, that's where the story is." Her linguistic skills, which had been her weapon at the restaurant, became her magnifying glass in the archive. As Ben had predicted, The older files were a chaotic mix. She found architectural plans with annotations in Spanish, soil analysis reports from a German firm filled with technical jargon in their native language, and correspondence with an Italian marble supplier that was a mix of broken English and fluent Italian. For Marge and the others, these were just documents to be scanned and filed. For Izzy, they were conversations she could understand. The breakthrough came one rainy Tuesday afternoon, deep in the sub-basement known as the Annex, where the oldest, most neglected records were stored. She was working on a box of files from the mid-1980s, the exact period of the Blue Heron groundbreaking. The box was labeled Waterfront Projects Miscellaneous. Inside, she found a set of architectural blueprints that were different from the official versions she had seen before. These were preliminary drafts, and in the margins, a Spanish architect had scrawled notes to his team. Her eyes scanned the Spanish text, translating automatically. Most of it was technical, but one note caught her eye. Cuidado con el informe geotécnico. El gringo insiste en que usemos los números del proyecto Garza Azul, no los nuestros. Hay riesgo de erosión. Be careful with the geotechnical report. The American insists we use the numbers from the Blue Heron project, not our own. There's a risk of erosion. Proyecto Garza Azul. Blue Heron Project. It was a direct translation, but the name itself wasn't the clue. It was the implication. There were two sets of numbers, a real one, and the one Croft insisted they use. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, Izzy began a new search, not for Blue Heron, but for any mention of Garza Azul. For hours, she cross-referenced old requisition forms and transfer logs. Finally, she found it, a single line item on a transfer manifest from 1988. One box labeled Garza Azul Geotechnica had been mistakenly transferred not to the main zoning archive, but to the Department of Public Works Hydrographic Survey Division, likely because of the Spanish word for blue. It was a simple clerical error, a mistake born from monolingual oversight, and it had sat unnoticed for over 30 years. The next day, feigning an errand for Marge, Izzy made her way to the Public Works building a few blocks away. In their even dustier basement archive, she found the box. It was sealed with brittle, yellowed tape. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sliced it open. It was all there. Not just the original, damning geotechnical survey showing the land was unstable and prone to erosion, but everything that went with it. There was the real environmental impact statement, predicting catastrophic damage to the river's ecosystem. And tucked between the pages was a series of internal memos from Croft Developments. The most damning was a handwritten note on Sterling Croft's personal letterhead, addressed to the project manager. It was blunt and brutal. Bury this. Get a new report. I don't care what it costs or who you have to pay. This land is worthless with these numbers. Make them the right numbers. The leather of the ledger felt alien beneath her trembling fingers, a relic from an era of handwritten sins. It was the smell that struck her first, not just the musty scent of aged paper and dried ink, but a faint, cloying odor of old money and decay, as if the corruption it documented had seeped into the very fibers of the book. Sterling Croft's initials, a crisp SC beside each entry, were not just letters. They were tombstones marking the burial sites of ethics, laws, and the lives of people who had stood in his way. Each stroke of the pen was a monument to his arrogance, a quiet boast that he could not only buy the city's soul, but keep meticulous records of the transaction. She wasn't holding a book. She was holding the crystallized hubris of a king. Triumph was not the emotion that flooded her. It was something colder, heavier. It was the crushing gravity of truth. She photographed each page, the click of her phone's shutter sounding like a gavel in the tomb-like silence of the archive basement. Her hands did not shake with fear, but with the electric current of consequence. This was the dynamite, yes, but she was the one who now had to light the fuse, knowing the blast would reshape not just his world, but hers too. She was no longer just Isabella Rossi, granddaughter, student, waitress. She was now the custodian of a secret that could dismantle an empire. Ben Carter's apartment was a chaotic archive of a different sort, smelling of stale coffee, newsprint, and a lifetime of righteous obsession. When he saw the images on her phone, he didn't cheer. The old reporter's face, a roadmap of cynical battles fought and lost, seemed to collapse inward. He sank into his worn armchair, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes with a profound weariness that went bone deep. 30-year, he whispered, his voice raspy. I knew it. I felt it in my gut for 30 years. But to see it, to see the receipts. He looked at Izzy, and for the first time, the piercing journalistic gaze was gone, replaced by something akin to awe and a deep paternal sorrow. You have to understand, kid. This isn't just a story anymore. This is a weapon, and once you fire it, you can't control where all the bullets go. It's going to get very, very loud. They didn't go to the police. As Ben predicted, Croft's tendrils were wrapped too tightly around the city's institutions. Instead, they weaponized the truth. Ben's chosen vessel was Sarah Jenkins, a fierce young reporter at the Chronicle, whose integrity he trusted implicitly. The week that followed their clandestine meeting was the longest of Izzy's life. She returned to her job in the Municipal Records Department, a ghost haunting a graveyard of paper, her secret a burning coal in her chest. Every time her supervisor, Marge, sighed in her direction, Izzy's heart seized, certain she had been discovered. She scanned brittle zoning permits from 1978 while picturing the front page of the Chronicle. She listened to the hum of the ancient office computers and imagined the roar of a city waking up to a decades-old lie. At home, she performed a careful pantomime of normalcy for her Nona. She talked about her day, about the dusty files and Marge's endless complaints. But her Nona, whose own language had been stolen by a stroke, but whose perception remained sharp as a needle, would watch her with knowing, worried eyes. One evening, as Izzy recounted a fabricated, cheerful story, her Nona reached out and placed a frail hand over hers. She couldn't form the words, but her touch spoke a clear and ancient sentence. I see your burden, my child. The storm broke not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet vibration of Izzy's phone on her nightstand. It was 6:00 a.m. A text from Ben, just a link. She clicked it. The rotten foundation. Documents reveal Croft's empire built on decades of fraud, bribery. The headline was a surgical strike. The article itself was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. Jenkins had laid out the evidence with devastating precision. The falsified geotechnical reports, the suppressed environmental studies, Croft's handwritten memo, a digital image of his own damning words staring out from the screen. The ledger was described as the Rosetta Stone of DC corruption. The city didn't just erupt. It underwent a seismic shock. For 2 days, Izzy stayed inside, watching the story she had unleashed devour the world. She saw news anchors speaking in grave tones in front of Croft Tower. She saw the mayor, a man whose campaign had been generously funded by Croft, stammering through a press conference. She saw the U.S. attorney announce a federal investigation with a grim certainty that suggested this was no mere fishing expedition. And through it all, Sterling Croft was silent, a king trapped in his castle, the walls of public opinion crumbling around him. On the third evening, a courier delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope to her door. There was no return address, but she knew. Inside was a single, stiff card. It was not a threat. It was not a summons. It was an invitation, written in elegant calligraphy. Mr. Sterling Croft requests the presence of Ms. Isabella Rossi for a private conversation. Tonight, 9 p.m. An address was provided, the penthouse of his now infamous tower. A car would be waiting. Ben pleaded with her not to go. It's a trap, Izzy. He's desperate. He'll try anything. No, she said, her voice unnervingly calm. He's not desperate. Not yet. He's confused. He thinks this is still a negotiation. He needs to understand why his money can't fix this. I need to be the one to tell him. The chauffeured car was silent, gliding through the streets of a city that now bore his name like a scar. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, a silent, glass-walled box climbing the spine of his empire, Izzy felt a strange sense of detachment. She wasn't afraid. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. She wasn't being brought to the lion's den. She was a naturalist, coming to observe a predator in a cage of his own making. He was waiting for her on a vast, white terrace overlooking the city. The lights of Washington, D.C. glittered below them, a galaxy he had once considered his personal property. He wasn't the same man she had served at the Gilded Quill. The bespoke suit was the same, but it hung on him differently, as if on a frame that had suddenly shrunk. The bronze tan was gone, replaced by the pallor of sleepless nights. The arrogance in his frozen lake eyes had been supplanted by a burning, bewildered fury. He didn't offer her a drink. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply stared at her, as if trying to solve a complex equation that defied all known rules. Why? The word was a splinter of glass. It wasn't about the money, I know that now. My lawyers ran the numbers. To buy every tenant in that building a new home, to set you up for life, it would have been a rounding error for me. I would have paid, so it wasn't the money. What was it? Revenge for some petty insult at the restaurant? Some misguided sense of social justice? He still saw the world as a balance sheet of transactions and motivations he could quantify. He needed to put her actions in a column he understood. Izzy walked to the edge of the terrace, the wind whipping at her hair. She looked down at the city, at the endless stream of headlights, each one a life, a story. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and steady above the wind. "It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about justice, not the way you think of it. You see this city as a collection of properties, of assets and liabilities. You took our home, our community, and you entered it onto your ledger as a liability to be cleared, an obstacle to be bulldozed." She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "You asked me to speak Spanish. Do you remember? You commanded it. You wanted to turn my language, my heritage, into a tool for your business deal, a party trick. What you failed to understand, Mr. Croft, is that for me, language isn't a tool. It's a map. It's the memory of my grandfather teaching me Italian proverbs in our kitchen. It's the sound of my nonna singing lullabies. It's the bridge that connects me to everyone I've ever loved. It is the blueprint of my soul." She took a step closer. "When you threatened my home, you weren't just threatening a building of brick and mortar. You were threatening the room where my grandfather died. You were threatening the window where my nonna sits every day, watching the world she fought so hard to give me. You were threatening the very source of my language. You tried to bulldoze my map. You tried to erase my blueprint." He stared at her, his incomprehension a vast, empty chasm between them. "You see," she finished, her voice softening into something like pity. "I didn't do this to destroy your empire. I did it to protect my world, and your empire just happened to be in the way. There is no price for that. There is no ledger that can account for it. It is a language you will simply never, ever understand." For a long moment, Sterling Croft was utterly still. He, a man who had commanded boardrooms and bent senators to his will, was defeated not by a rival or a regulator, but by a concept that was completely alien to him. He had been checkmated by a move that wasn't even on his board. He finally turned away from her and looked out at his city, his captured kingdom, and in the reflection on the glass, Izzy saw the face of a man who had just realized he was utterly, irrevocably bankrupt in a way that had nothing to do with money. She turned and left him there, alone with his view. The fall was slow, then all at once. The federal indictments came down like hailstones. Partners fled, stocks plummeted, and the name Croft became a synonym for civic poison. The legal battle over her building evaporated. The bankrupt shell company was forced to sell, and in a move of profound poetic justice, the tenants, guided by a nonprofit legal aid society Ben had connected them with, formed a co-op. They bought their own home. Izzy didn't attend the press conferences or follow the trial obsessively. She had lit the fuse. She felt no need to sift through the wreckage. Her victory wasn't in his conviction, but in the quiet moments that followed. It was in the impromptu party in the building's courtyard, where Mrs. Rodriguez pressed a pot of basil into her hands and kissed her on both cheeks, whispering, "Nuestra campeona," our champion. It was in watching the Tedeschi toddler take his first steps on the sidewalk that would not be turned to rubble. It was the day the new deed was posted in the lobby, listing the tenant's co-op as the owner, and her nonna, standing beside her, managed a single clear triumphant word: Casa. Home. Georgetown did more than just reinstate her scholarship. The dean of the linguistics department, a formidable woman who had followed the story, called Izzy into her office. "What you did, Ms. Rossi," she said, her voice devoid of sentimentality but full of respect, "was the most potent act of applied linguistics I have ever witnessed. You used language not just to communicate, but to excavate truth. We want you to finish your degree, of course, but we also want you to teach. A new seminar. We're calling it Forensic Linguistics, Language as a Record of Power." Her final meeting with Ben was at a small cafe in Adams Morgan, weeks after Croft had been sentenced. The old journalist looked 10 years younger. The obsessive fire in his eyes had been banked, leaving a warm, peaceful glow. He was finally writing his book, but it wasn't about Croft. It was a biography of his own father, a union carpenter. "I spent my whole life chasing monsters," he said, nursing a cup of tea. "I thought that was the job. But you taught me something, kid. The job isn't to chase the monster. It's to stand with the people he's chasing. You didn't just find a story. You protected a home." He slid a small cloth-wrapped package across the table. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound first edition of a book on the etymology of Italian dialects. "A map maker needs good maps," he said with a gruff smile. That fall, as she walked back onto the Georgetown campus, the crisp autumn air felt different, cleaner. The Gothic arches and manicured lawns no longer felt like an escape from her life, but an extension of it. She was not the same student who had left 2 years ago. Her dreams of being a UN interpreter had been a desire to build bridges between worlds, but she had learned that sometimes the most important translation work wasn't between nations, but between power and truth, between a legal document and a human life. She sat on a bench in the quad, Ben's book in her lap, and looked up at the sky. Her grandfather had told her that every language was a new soul. She had learned it was also a key. She had found a key, rusted with age and hidden by a filing error, and used it to unlock a cage she hadn't even known the entire city was in. Her work was not about bringing down towers of steel and glass anymore. It was about reinforcing the foundations of a home, a community, a truth. And she had a lifetime of new languages to learn, new maps to draw, and new blueprints to protect.